Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Kellen Bateham. This is the Northwest Blacksmith Association's digital demo number 30. And today we are very lucky to be joining Leslie Tharp in her shop in Gainesville, Florida. She's going to be demonstrating a large leaf. She's got a sample piece that she already made, and we're doing this digital demo in collaboration with the Society of Inclusive Blacksmiths. And so both these leaves are going to go up for auction, and 50% of these proceeds are going to go to the Society of Inclusive Blacksmiths. I believe it's their scholarship program.
Yes.
Yeah, and so if you're unfamiliar with them, I would say, now's a great time to hop over, check out their website. They're definitely trying to provide opportunities for minorities, women, just marginalized.
Represented. Yeah.
So without further ado, Leslie Tharp, everyone. Thanks, Leslie.
Okay, sweet. So I'm going to start working on this leaf, and I had mentioned in that initial portfolio review that really big bridge leaf project is where I started thinking about this design, but I have certainly been exposed to a similar concept on a much smaller scale. So to begin, I'm going to plasma cut the parts. You could definitely cut these with abrasives if you don't have a plasma cutter. I'm going to do some welding. For some beginners, that's definitely a steep climb to get that kind of equipment access. You can always do this as a fold form initially. One of the big limitations for me is I'm going to use my gas forge. And so I've got to come up with a leaf that's large but can fit in the actual chamber of the forge. So I'm going to make kind of a long, narrow leaf. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got 10 or 11 gauge. I can't remember. I think it's 11 gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and just hand draw out a really shallow S curve. And I like these funny little nubs. And so if you were being really particular about your design, you could draw this on paper and cut it out later. Cut it out and trace it. I'm gonna just pretend that I'm good enough here to match this. So we'll see.
Is that a giant lily pad that you're pulling this off of? Was that from another
part? Yeah. It was. Okay, so I'm going to use my plasma cutter and just cut these two halves out. So when I'm plasma cutting, just freehanding, I kind of like to set up my non-dominant hand as a base and let it drag across the material so that I get kind of a more steady cut.
Well, those were the strong, confident lines of somebody who's ran a plasma torch a bunch. That was real smooth.
Did you say too much?
No,
I heard you. Okay, so I'm gonna put a little weld along the seam. It's not gonna line up perfectly, but looks like I got kind of lucky. I've got one of them is a little longer, a little wider than the other. What I'm gonna do is just leave as much material on there as is available. And after I work the form of the leaf, I can clean up the underside of that center vein and smooth it out. But for right now, since I'm gonna push on it and pull on it so much, if it's got a little more metal there than it needs, that's actually beneficial to me. So I'm just gonna quench these and grind the slag off the edge before I weld it. And the scallop edge I don't care too much about because so much of that stuff will change while I'm forging, and then I'll clean it up at the end. So anytime you're grinding slag, if you haven't done this too often, you can see it really collects just on the corner. So when I grind, I don't need to spend time here. I'm just gonna come in and hit this corner. And then slag is not something that welds because it's just full of air. It's not really steel anymore. So definitely got to get rid of that before we weld on it. All right. Cool. So I'm going to throw this in my vise. I'll just run a bead down that whole length. Okay. So I've got a couple areas where the two sides are going to sit just right next to each other, but more often than not, I have one that's protruding higher than the other, and that's actually a little more beneficial. But again, this isn't not terribly important at all. Line up perfectly. Good enough. So if I've got any welders in the crowd, I'm sure you can hear that arc jumping. And that's just because I didn't clean the rust. So it's not got the best connection.
I meant to ask this earlier.
Sure.
Can you show us what you're making? I know you have a sample piece. Can you show us what
Yeah.
It's going to be?
So this is the idea.
Cool. And we do have welders in the crowd and folks who are always interested in tools. And so Robert has asked, what is the brand of plasma cutter you're using? And then what is welder? I mean, can you show us your tools?
Yeah. Lorenzo, do you want to pan over to the welder and plasma cutter so they can see the brand? So I'm using a Miller-Matic 210 welder that runs on 220 volt, and I'm using a Victor thermodynamic torch, and I think 52 Cutmaster is the model.
Oh, those are good machines. I got a little 42 in my shop, and man,
oh yeah, I had a 42 forever. They cut so good. So let's see what we got. So I've got these two pieces smushed together. My first challenge is I've got to start opening them up before I can work any of the volume in each side. I'm going to start with a really skinny chisel and try not to mar the material while I use it. Actually, I'm going to let that heat up more. So who do I got in the audience?
Barbie Espinoza, Becky Smith, Bryson Alden, Chris Lucabella,
Okay, some names I
Dennis
don't
Twill,
recognize.
Frank Sneed, George Blackman, Jeff Wilson, Jim Garrett, Joe Elliott, John Dorfeld, Kenny O'Laughlin, Carl Schumer, Lee Cordecaraya, Lisa Geertsen, Mark Waterman, Peter Clark, Phil Coleman, Rochelle Hams,
Rochelle. I gotta just yell when I know someone's name.
Thornton, Robert Newcomer, Robert Scully, Billy O, and Claire Guy.
Cool. Thank you guys for showing up. So I'm just spending the first heat here trying to widen this up. So we got enough to start next time right on the anvil. So my goal is to open this enough so that I can start playing around with each side of it. We'll move into this probably in a couple of heats.
So I was busy reading names when you started there, but it looked like you first started to flay that open with a chisel, right?
Yeah, I just use a chisel, and sometimes I use a wider one, but this works great, just getting it between the slats. I'll say probably the worst part of that step is holding the material. And, you know, sometimes you just get used to that awkward step when you work alone. It's always nice, especially if you're starting, to have somebody help you with that. Or in this scenario, I could probably just put the very bottom of that welded portion, like right where the welds are, in the vise and still get the top of the leaf to open up enough. So that's probably a much more reasonable way to do it. But I'm kind of used to this little ballerina move. So that's comfortable for me. So I'm going to put a little heat on the narrow side and open that up as well.
Can you have Lorenzo pan over so we can get a little better look at your forge?
Yeah, you want to come through the side? Or yeah, Lorenzo, do you want to pan on the forge a little bit more?
I'm just curious kind of, what the size is.
Yeah, so I've got a little cracked brick to fix, but the base, the floor is cast Mizzou, and then the rest is fire brick. And it's a home build. And I've got a double burner, Venturi burner, and I built the burners as well. And it works really well. That Mizzou castable, if anybody has not tried that yet, wow, I really like it. And it holds the heat, so you're not losing nearly as much of your heat as with just a fire brick. And if you're doing big, heavy work, it just holds up really well. Okay, so here we'll do the vise move, open up the top of this.
Well, and for folks in the crowd who are interested in forges and the ones that different folks have, we are in works. I think starting next month, we're going to have kind of a series of hammer talks that are going to be around forges. I believe we're starting with gas forges, and then it'll be moving on to alternate fuels and induction forges and solid fuels over the next few months. So you're interested in forges, stay tuned.
Okay, so now that I've got that opened up, I'll heat it up and start working each side. So here's where it gets a little tricky. This form hopefully fits in the forge the whole time I'm working. Sometimes it's really difficult. And that's
Leslie, can you hear me?
we overheated, as you said we might, and it's also like 90 degrees in Florida right now.
Well, I was telling everybody when you were off that maybe we should be planning our spring and summer ones for northern latitudes, and we'll come visit Florida.
I thought we would be safe in March, but apparently not. I'm going to take a heat, by the way, just because it's been ready for me.
Okay, take that heat, and then we'll get into.
Okay, so I'm going to just start dishing out. Do I want you? Yeah. Okay, what questions we got?
Okay, so we're going to start with a forge question on, do you know what kind of refractory you're using in there, or your castable?
Yeah, the castable was Mizzou.
Okay. So Leslie, Robert's asking if, looks like you're using a ball peen hammer there, and you are using the flat end of it to be doing that sinking.
Yeah, most of it, if it's a tight squeeze, I'll flip it to the smaller side. But this flat side is dressed in a way that it doesn't have any hard edges, and I think it's really nice for sinking, and it doesn't leave a lot of hammer marks.
Okay, so you're saying that, using that ball peen hammer, you used the small peen if you were working in tight kind of radiuses. Otherwise, using the big or flat is good because you've dressed the edges a lot.
Yeah, so the flat is not perfectly flat, but it's not as sharp of a hammer mark as the ball peen. So like if I was going to come in and dress this edge, that's a little hard to aim with the wider side. So I may flip that and use the ball peen. But unless I'm trying to leave a hammer mark on a large surface, I don't tend to use that side too much. This little edge now. Yeah, so I started for years just using these open form donut shapes, and it's a pretty easy form to make. If you can get something with just a really soft edge, that's your best friend. You're not necessarily trying to fit your form into that center, so it's not always important that it's a perfect circle. I mean, this is like a pretty quick. But something like this works just fine, even though it's a little bit silly. And I've made some that are quite huge. They don't have to be built super strong, depending on the material you're going to work and maybe how often you're going to work. But another tool that I'm not going to use today, but I use quite often, is an oak stump, some kind of hardwood stump, and you can kind of grind in some divots or burn in some divots. And like a really basic setup at home and it's hard for you to build tools right now, I think that's one of the most approachable ways to start working with sheep. So that's all I was going to mention.
Oh, well, I would second, having it be real easy. All you got to do is make a circle or get a piece of wood that you can kind of grind or burn in a divot to.
Yeah, works great. So when I'm sinking in these forms with these hollow tools, I'm really starting in the middle first. I want a lot of my stretching to happen there. And then I'm trying to kind of come in and hook the hammer right inside that rim if it just so happens that it fits in there really well, because it'll give me kind of a cleaner edge. And I am trying to condense that edge. I don't want it to ripple. So if I can get in there and dress it a little bit, it saves me a bit of trouble later. So now with this pattern, I'm going to switch and work this side, but I'll allow these sides to rise up and then these two scalloped edges to divot inward.
So Joe Elliott's saying that it can be counterintuitive in large sinking to starting hammer blows on the edge and not the center.
Say that again.
Joe Elliott saying that large sinking to start hammer blows on the edge and not the center.
Oh, okay, that's great. I've always done it from the center outward, and I've always worked in a spiral pattern. But that's fantastic. I'd like to see more of that.
Well, one of our last demonstrators had a saying that I guess her instructor was known for saying that there's 1,000,000 ways to do something right and only about 12 ways to do something wrong. And so as long as
you normally have to go through those 12 first.
Joe's asking, is your shop in like an industrial area? Where is your shop located?
Yeah, it's just a little industrial spot. My neighbors to the side work on a lot of car mechanics. Oops, working backwards. Yeah, so a lot of people around here just fix up cars. We've got some folks that are a little more specialized.
Well, having worked in a shop myself that had a auto mechanic neighbor, it sure is helpful when there's somebody next door who specializes in other things.
Oh yeah, and anytime, my truck is behaving erratically, I normally have somebody I can ask if I get stranded at the shop. Yeah, so I moved into this space like 8 or 9 years ago. It's 750 square feet, so a little bit tiny, especially for the big work, but it served me well. A couple years ago, I opened an adjacent shop in the same complex just to devote to teaching. So I had that set up with a bunch of anvils, a bunch of forges, tool racks on the wall. It looked really nice. And when COVID hit, I kind of shrunk everything up into the studio. And it's been a little funky. We've had more stuff taking up space than I had to find a place for before, but it's helped me learn organizational skills. And so that's how I'm operating right now. I mean, at some point, it would be fantastic to either expand the shop as both my studio and teaching space just in a larger area, or to separate them again, because it was really nice to just open the door and have the classroom set up and ready to go. But maybe that's a little luxurious. I don't know. It was really fun.
About how many square feet are you operating in there? Do you know?
I've got about 750. There's a little spill out space outside.
Well, I definitely can feel the pains of having a small shop.
Yeah, man, I really liked seeing your shop the other day. That railing situation you've got was so awesome and clever.
What Leslie's referring to is a big grab bar that I've got that has a post on one end and it wraps around. It's a very awkward and long bar, and I didn't have anywhere to store it, so I've tied it to my ceiling, and it's suspended above my shop right now. When you got small space, you got to get creative sometimes.
You do. Okay, so I've done my really big dishing. I'm gonna take a couple of heats, maybe a heat on each section, and I'm gonna do a little bit of raising. It's more for the purpose of shaping the edge and regulating some of the really big erratic hammer marks that I have. So I'm gonna bounce around a little bit between my regular hammer, which just has a nice flat face, and the ball peen. My goal is not necessarily to leave an even hammered finish, more just to streamline some of the texture. So I've also got a lot of radiant heat I'm going to bounce around. So I may wear a glove, not normally something I would do on my hammering hand, but with this really big sheet metal, it's just kind of tough to work around it without one. Is that your dog, Helen?
Yeah, he knows that I'm doing something, so he wants to be part.
Let him talk.
We don't want him to talk. I'm trying to break him of that habit. He's very loud when he talks.
Well, while these edges are really hot, I'm just trying to curl them down. And then I'll go back over. So as this piece gets curlier on the edge, it's harder for me to hold it with tongs. So you may maybe see me do the hot metal dance a couple times. Okay, so I've got those edges worked pretty well. I'm going to come back in with the ball peen just right on the anvil and dress a little bit of this. So when I'm working right on the face of the anvil, I want to be mindful about what's making contact with the anvil and what's not. So ideally, I'm only hitting against the anvil the areas that are already making contact on the anvil. Come on, little tongs. So I'm just trying to regulate some of the hammer marks. I'm trying to reshape the area.
Leslie, can you tell us about that raising stake you've got there? Do you know what it was made out of, or?
Yeah, I just made this. It's a piece of scrap metal. It's high carbon. I just went ahead and, so this is the original diameter. So I just forged down here and then did a really basic little tenon. It works great.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be nice if I did a little more sheet metal. I'd probably make some more stakes that came out and gave me some surface to work on in this direction. But I like the height of this because I can have work that takes up a lot of space below and it's not getting in another really simple approach, which I've used plenty of times and I still use it in my fly press, is just a modified wall on a trailer hitch. So I just still welded the top, which is normally flat, and that works really great. You know, if you're doing a lot of this work, just grind off that chrome.
Well, you're not the only one. I've seen that tool in a few shops. It looks like, yep, Robert's got one too. So
It's too easy. It's too easy. Just start with what you've got, you know? Okay, so just the bottom section to go, and then we'll start to put a big twist in the form to give it a little bit more of the movement you may associate with a leaf.
how'd you get into all this? Where'd you find blacksmithing?
Yeah, so I went to college out of high school, was doing a lot of painting and ceramic work in high school. When I got into the University of Florida, I was exposed to woodworking first, I think, but enticed to become a sculpture major. So I'd have exposure to a wider variety of materials than maybe the ceramics program would lend itself to. So in that program, I learned some metalworking, but it was mostly designed for cutting and welding. My big hook was realizing that I could pull a bunch of metal out of a dumpster, weld it together so it was bigger than me, and then when it cooled off, I could climb it. And so it was like the child in me felt all the power. And I was just really into it. I spent, you know, every hour I could in the metal shop, and I felt kind of desperate when I got out of school to get access into a shop setting where I could have access to that equipment again. So after I graduated, I moved to South Florida. I got a job as a aluminum welder for a railing company, like a cut and welded, pretty streamlined welding company. And I made my way back to Gainesville because I just felt like if I was going to put all that labor in to, you know, such a labor-intensive practice, that I'd like for it to incorporate some of my own creative ideas. So I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but soon after that, I took a 2-week intensive class up at Penland School of Craft, and that's where the blacksmithing came in. So I think when I mushed on some metal, something about it felt familiar, maybe like clay had to be from years past, and I might be a bit of a fire nut, so I was hooked right away. And you know, I went for as many summers as I could, trying to get work study scholarships at Penland and Haystack, and try to get in there and take classes. But after the first summer, I started cobbling together my own setup in Gainesville, and I think it was about a year in that I started to rent a little industrial shop because I had bounced inner city, like residential neighborhoods, and I just couldn't do that type of work in my backyard very easily. So that was kind of my path forward, and then in the last, you know, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, I've had those opportunities to work with just like really fantasticness. And, you know, anytime I can jump in and work with anybody, I learn so much. So I've been really grateful of that network. And the public art stuff is, you know, where I started in college. I had the feeling that I wasn't as interested in gallery-based work. I really wanted pieces to be in public spaces where people would kind of stumble upon them. They're not necessarily educated in fine art, but their interpretations were always so interesting. And so I was always making really big stuff in school and putting it out in the courtyards and out of the street, and kind of just observing how people engage with it. The public art path made a ton of sense for me. And the way, if anybody's kind of getting into this and thinking about how they can finance large work, I really like the public art method of financing because you submit proposals, there are set budgets, you can come up with a draw schedule, kind of like you would if you were a contractor, and so you're typically getting paid for the work as you make it, instead of self-financing and hoping that it will sell at some point. So that was great. It can be a very competitive market. I mean, if you get into doing nice private custom work, you can definitely come up with those financial arrangements as well. But I think there's a lot of public art opportunities. There's a lot of state funding that goes to it automatically. So there's a pool of need and places that you can seek it out. So that can be a little less daunting than just already being connected with people who want to purchase high-end goods.
Yeah, I know that it can be daunting in the beginning, especially if you're trying to do custom iron work for folks and finding those clients, and you know, finding those avenues into public art can be so important for some folks. But I know that that comes with its own set of daunting challenges. So
it does.
putting all
I was on. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I was saying just all the effort you can put in on the front side to apply to something to then get told no.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've only put in for a handful of pieces this year, and I'm still waiting to hear back on a couple. But I'll easily throw 20 solid work hours trying to get a proposal put together if it's outside the scope of something I've proposed before. I've been doing a couple collaboratory proposals, so we've got a lot of behind the scenes dialogue that has to get ironed out before we can, you know, pitch our ideas. But it can be a lot of work. So it's really cool when it works out, but it's definitely a time investment. I was just on a panel for with a few public artists from St. Petersburg on Zoom, just talking about how to get into the industry and you know, what the overhead looks like, basically what's the red tape. And by the end of it, I wasn't quite sure if we had convinced anybody or deterred them. Put that glove off just in time for all that heat. Ooh, it's spicy. A lot of radiant heat on that side. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to get a nice heat on this entire length and then twist it. So on my next heat, I'm gonna throw the leaf in the vise, and I'm mostly working on just the end of it. So I'll just show you guys. I can get this side to twist down, then I've got a little bit of a curve here, and I think it looks really nice, and it also sits well. So I'll have 3 points of contact, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to kind of work out the curve, but then it, you know, the nice bit about it is it kind of collapses some of these areas in unexpected ways. So then you can kind of go in and work them to get a little bit more of the composition you'd like to come out.
So Claire has written that she's worked in a forge in Georgia, and forging in the summer can be brutal, requiring
The worst.
requiring creative solutions to stay cool. And what are some of your methods for dealing with the Florida heat?
Yeah, put an ice pack in the bottom of your sports bra. Step 1. Work early in the morning or late at night. Drink a ton of water. Stop eating sugar. I don't know. Which way do I want to do this? It's tricky. The biggest solution I found is to complain a lot. I think I'm going the wrong way. Am I helping you guys with these suggestions?
Yeah, no, and Billy, I was referring to the sports bra, that not all of us have that option. And I would disagree, Bill. Sports bras are available.
Yeah, Bill.
You can find one for yourself and fill it full of ice packs.
Yeah, Bill, step up your game. What else? I don't know. I mean, I just have these little 20-pound tanks that I use for my forges because I have so many student forges. So it makes it easy, but I put them in a little bucket of water to help with the cooling effect. And I do end up with some really cold water when I'm working. So I'll dip a bandana in that and just try to keep my head cold. A lot of times I'll move the forge right outside my door so that I'm not trapping the heat inside. I blow a fan out. When I switched up my teaching to be at the studio and not its own space, I actually started something I did for years, and we just reverted to it where we'll just work under a pop-up tent with masks on, and the breeze is exceptionally nice. So, it's a little bit of food for thought. In Florida, it's really nice to have these set up spaces to work in, but we do have, today is unseasonably warm, but when it's hot, it's hot. So, being out in the breeze. But what were Claire's tricks? Because maybe we should trade ideas here.
Oh, I'm sure she has a few she'll share. And so, Leslie, I got to say, I was a little surprised to see that you're running such a small propane tank. And I can see why you have it in the water to keep it from freezing up.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get about 6 working hours out of it.
Well,
okay, so I'm just going to work this to look good. Basically, it doesn't need to look like the sample, but I kind of play around with it a little. Figure out what I want to do. Okay, I like that better. Hear your dog. I'm going to heat that up. I'm going to try to droop this side downwards so I can get a better base on it to sit. Yeah, so the propane tank, it just works well. Like in the teaching shop, I had 2 forges set up and a kind of a central walkway between a couple stations, and have like 2 to 3 students sharing their stations, sharing one forge, just working from opposite ends. And that worked out great, but the space is very small. So if I can get the propane tank into the forge area, that was really helpful. So I just kind of stuck to the small tank idea.
Can I ask a couple questions about your big sculpture that's taken up all your space in your shop?
Yes, please.
Did you say earlier it was core 10, the whole thing?
Yes. Yep.
And where is its final home going to be?
Raymore, Missouri, about 15, 20 miles outside of Kansas City. And the piece, I mean, can I talk about how awesome they have been to work with and what the concept behind the piece is?
Oh, please do.
Okay, so they did approach me, which with public art, especially out of state, that is still very unusual for me. So that was really fun. And they knew, you know, the park that they wanted in, and they had seen some of my pieces, like the bear sculptures are in a neighboring town right now. And so they had an idea of the aesthetics they liked, but the concept was going to be up to me to decide. And so I pitched them a couple different ideas. With public art, I really like to work specific to the region. And of course, my work has some themes that tend to repeat themselves, but especially with environmental conservation, it's really fun for me to learn more about the areas that I'm proposing work for. So in that area of the world, as perhaps some of our listeners or viewers are from, there is a native habitat of tall grass prairies that have been diminished to about 3% of what they had originally been. I'm going to take a heat on this and just scrub the fire scale off and maybe manipulate some of the transitions between the bulges and the dips. So the tall grass prairies, and I'm sure we have people in the audience who probably know more about this than me, but the tall grass prairies had these really curiously deep root systems that up until 5 or 10 years ago, scientists speculated perhaps they were deep so that the plants would have access to water during drought. And so now they're understanding that it's much more complex than that. So there's coexistence between the grasses, as we're hearing more and more about, you know, root systems of trees working together and sharing resources. So that's a big thing. And one of the coolest concepts that stuck in my mind was these below ground root systems are processing more CO2, turning it into oxygen than the rainforest, where it's comparable in scale. So I find it very interesting that the parts of the way the world works that are unseen are the most mysterious. So I had pitched to them the idea that we just focus on a really big root structure. You know, I think it's beautiful. I think it's a really interesting form to play with. And they were totally on board. So I think one of the cool things about public art is it's beautiful, or it can be beautiful, but it's also an opportunity to highlight some curiosities that maybe viewers will explore more. So if there's any educational component that I can throw in the mix, it's really fun for me. So I worked with some local environmental conservationists who work in different regions of the state to talk about the ecosystems that are most valuable to focus on and preserve right now, and how local citizens can pitch in. And so we kind of went through our biggest highlights if there was any way I could incorporate some of these subjects into the piece. And so my next challenge, I am like over the moon happy with the form, and I have one last challenge for the piece, and it's to incorporate outlines of different native mammals and insects that live in these tall grass prairies. And I want it to be they can't be something you notice right away, but at some point you do have to notice it, or what's the point of my effort? And so that's the really tough balance with these mysterious images, coming to life. And so this park also is called Hawk Ridge Park, and it's the first inclusively accessed park in the city. And so people of all modes of transportation are able to move through this park freely. And so another important aspect of the piece is that there's hidden visibility at different levels, just depending on how you come to the piece. You can see things as you look at different heights. So that's another really fun element that we got to kind of play with.
Well, thank you for telling us about that. What a cool piece and a great opportunity to be creative.
Yeah, so fun.
I just love that you're so environmentally focused with the design aspect of it. Really tells a story.
It's the wannabe scientist in me that thinks that's so great. And I think one thing that this year has taught me is that there's this opportunity in public art to talk about social injustice. And in my personal studio practice, I'm kind of wrestling with ways that can happen. And it's just really neat. Public art is an opportunity for conversation. And just like music, I think it can frame subjects in a way that's unexpected and maybe a little bit easier to be curious about. Okay, so I'm going to let this cool for just a second and quench it. And then I'm just going to grind this edge smooth before I do my finish work on it.
Cool. Well, while you're letting it cool, we have some keeping cool observations and tips and tricks come up.
Yes. Bring it.
Claire says, in Georgia, definitely spraying clothes with a hose, foraging until they're dry, and then spraying them. Early and late night foragings, and then charging a 20% extra on rush orders in the summer just for the extra effort it takes to stay cool.
I love that. Oh my God, I love that. Can I ask, is Claire from a swampy, humid environment or dry? What part of Georgia? Because I could see the wet clothes never, ever drying here.
Well, I know that she's from Athens, Georgia, and not.
Okay.
I can't tell you exactly what the climate's like, but I'm pretty sure it's a little more humid than dry.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that being another 20 pounds that you have to carry around, but I will try it. Okay, so I just want this to cool off a little bit. I don't want to shock the weld too bad. If this was going to be structural, that would be much more important to consider. I'm going to do this cool dance. Tell me more. Tell me more about summer forging, Kellen.
Rochelle has said that she will freeze gallon jugs of water, as well as wet freezing kind of the camas type scarves for her head and shoulders. And then, and you got a fan running, it just helps with that heat, wicks it out of you. And
I love that fan.
Her time in Florida that she would her work gloves in the freezer.
Oh, that's a good one. I have never heard that. Lisa, how are you liking your Midwestern summer forging experience? You got a little bit of that last year, right?
Well, we have been getting to visit her on campus a few times, and she says she likes it here lots.
Okay. I still am going to come visit you, I swear to God.
Well, now you said it, you got it, so hold you to it.
I got to come play with those power hammers with you. Okay. So I'm just going to grind this edge. We didn't worry too much about this when plasma cutting it, but I do want to draw some attention to it with the finished form. So I'm going to clean that up, and then I'll just show you guys some simple ways to finish sheet metal like this, especially to highlight some of the volume without getting into paint or anything. I'm going to just trim up this area. You guys can see here on the edge if Lorenzo wants to pan around just where my little weld on the edge split. And at this point, it's not really worth it for me to try to smush that back together. So I'm going to just trim off the tip of that shape.
Leslie, sometimes while you're in this kind of abrasive mode, I have questions about what folks are using. What are you using for abrasives? What was that first disc you were?
Oh, yeah, this is like a knockoff of a Cubitron disc. Have you heard of those?
I have.
Okay, yeah, I really like them. It's a ceramic based abrasive. I think this is like a 36. They don't hold up as long as Cubitron, I'll just say that. But wow, yeah, this is a game changer.
And then that sits on a whole backing pad, right?
Yes, yep. It's just a rubber backing pad. This one's worn a little bit on the edge, but you can get it in a 4.5, a 5, or larger if you want. But yeah.
So I use one similar, and Hunter Dahlberg turned me on to them, and he was using this trick, which I think is just genius. He'll take a brand new flat disc pad, so it's still really flat, and then use that same little inner grommet and use the flat disc as the backing pad because it makes it softer, and then you can get that disc to go all the way sub of the disc, and so you can hold it flat on a piece of sheet or something, and you're not, that little spinny metal part's not grinding things up.
So this is what we're talking about?
Yeah, just mounting that same pad right on that instead of that plastic pad. Yep.
Ooh, sweet. I'm gonna try that.
Oh yeah, I was amazed how well it works.
Great tip. I love that. Okay, just a little more grinding, everybody. How are we doing on time?
Oh, we're doing great. We got plenty of time. And just for anybody who might not be watching the chat, we're about to close up this auction right now. Kind of starting to go through the going once, going twice routine. So if you would like to own a Leslie Tharp original large leaf and donate some money to a couple of great causes, now's your chance.
All right. So I'm going to just take a second to grind a little bit on this spine. So again, that's something we kind of ignored in the beginning. I tore my little edge. Okay, so I've got a little porosity in that weld that was on rusted metal. So I'll go back in after the demo and just fill and smooth that. But let me show you guys how I would finish this. So I'm going to heat it back up and I'm going to just give it like a really good scrub. I may forge this area just a little differently. And then I'll do a brass brush rub. So I'm sure we've got a lot of folks who are familiar with that, but if you're not, maybe this will be helpful. So the nice part about the finish work, aside from trying to get a lot of that fire scale to release, I don't need the heat to be quite so high. gosh. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about SIBs. If you're in the audience and you're not familiar, I got recruited to come to a very special forging collaboration on the mountain. I don't know how many years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. And that was organized by Anne Bujold and Lisa Geertsen and Rachel David. And I felt super fortunate to be one of the people that got to participate in that first event, of which I'm sure there will be more. But it was in that process that I met people who had a more similar story to me than I have ever met before. And it helped so much. I can't even describe what sort of a void had been filled. I felt like I could ask a lot of questions, learn from people, in a community that really supported my growth as a blacksmith. And that's not to say that I hadn't had that experience prior, but it was just really, really cool to see a lot of women identifying blacksmiths kind of moving their way through the field. And so that was the initial brainstorming of SIBs, and it's definitely been developing ever since. And there's a ton of people putting in a ton of effort to come up with ways to reach underserved communities, underrepresented blacksmiths, and provide support for them as they make their way into the, Lorenzo's telling me, he wants me to be away from the forge so they can hear me. Yeah, but just creating ways for people to get in the field and get a leg up in the field and find that community for themselves. So they've just launched their first round of mentorship program, and I'm participating in that, and I think it's a great idea. I think more people should apply for the next round. Kellen, I know we were kind of chatting about our different experiences with that, and I'll let you know I did finally get a hold of my mentee, and so we're off to a really good start. And they're also providing scholarships to some Smiths, hopefully in the near future, to apply to go to in-person workshops. This pandemic is behind us, fingers crossed soon. And so they're just doing all kinds of really, really cool stuff. And I think there's a ton of ways for different people, whether they feel they're marginalized or not in the blacksmithing world, to participate in this. And yeah, I'm so excited, and I definitely want to support them any chance that I can.
Well, thank you for the SIBS rundown, and I 100% agree. I think that they have got a really great cause, and their mentorship program that they just launched. I signed up for it. I've got a mentee as well, and it's been really rewarding, I think, for everyone involved so far. So
yeah. And you're working with somebody in Australia, right?
I am. Yeah, and
I think that's so cool.
Yeah, it's been great. It's the hardest part's trying to keep in mind that folks in Australia are 6 hours behind me, but a day ahead. So it gets confusing.
Awesome. Yeah, so my person lives just down the road from me, and I emailed Anne when I got our matchup to say, oh no, I think she's going to be sick of me because, she's already worked with me in the past. And I was finally able to get in touch with her. She's not an emailer, and I'm more of an emailer than a phone person, but we got hooked up, and she's like really, really thrilled. It's been a couple of years since I've had her over here for a class or anything, and she's really trying to get her own setup together and figure out what some next steps would be for gaining skills, but also kind of talking about the business side of things. That's something she's hoping to move into, is selling some work. And I just think it's really awesome that, we can get back together through this program, and there's just an open door for people to ask questions. And yeah, I don't even know what I would have done with that kind of opportunity. So really excited they organized that.
Yeah, well, Lisa had to split, but as she left, she wanted to let you know to just thank you for talking about SIBS and being part of all the programming, and lots of love and great demo.
Aww. Lisa. All right, so just trying to get some of the stuff out. I can definitely go back in and wire brush this when it's cooled off. But I'm gonna use the heat that I do have to come in and start working some of these surfaces with a brass brush. Let me see if I can switch my grip. Okay, so here's the deal with the brass. It doesn't have to be crazy hot. Somebody in the audience can probably tell me what temperature is great. I'm gonna guess 800 degrees. But that brass will come right off. And what I like to do with it is try to highlight some of these areas that I want people to focus on. So I like to get this upper edge. These areas where I've got a lot of volume. I'm gonna come in here. Get a little scrub. And I kind of moved a little quickly through this edge cleanup, so I will be going back into this piece after our demo today and touching that up just a little bit before I ship it off to the lucky recipient. So beeswax does not need to be applied when the metal is quite this hot. It shouldn't be smoking off.
Oh, and Rick is generous. He has even bumped up the price to a higher price. Thank you so much, Rick. Oh,
sorry, Becky. Thank you, Rick. That is really, really awesome of you.
Well, it's past the impact test. Becky says, "Don't break."
Becky, I'm gonna just drive my truck over this real quick to make sure that it's sturdy, so that when I send it to you.
And Rick's thanking you for your spirit, Leslie. And I got to say, I put the same thing. This has been a fun demo. So cool to watch. You're a pleasure to listen to.
Aw, thank you guys so much for having me. I was certainly nervous to show off my little tiny studio to you, but I just really appreciate what your organization has done and how you've been able to reach people during these pretty stressful times. And I've enjoyed so many of your demos that it was quite an honor to be able to participate myself. So I guess I'm gonna jump on the camera here, but if there's any part of the studio you want to see, I can talk to people about any of the tools they're interested in.
Well, I have some questions about your finishes. So I know that you live in a pretty harsh environment for
the worst.
Stuff.
Do you mean the worst?
The worst. Go dump everything in the ocean before you. But what, besides doing things like galvanizing or painting or things like, what are the finishes that are your go-to?
Okay, so if it can live indoors in Florida, I would like to do an oil finish. It's my favorite, and I really like this kind of oil. It's meant to thin out oil paint. So in Florida, at least you can get this in hardware stores, and it can be applied cold. If it's applied warm, it blackens it. I don't think this is sold in some states, maybe California. But so that one's my favorite. Yeah, the cancer causing ones are.
Repeat that. So you said if you apply it cold, it turns things darker?
Actually, if you apply it hot, it darkens it. If it's cold, it saturates it, so there's a little bit of a darkening element. And I'll just show you. This is just a simple trivet I made, but this is oiled, and you wouldn't notice. Like, it just looks like metal, not dry metal. But yeah, if you apply it a little hot, just that smoking temperature, it does blacken it a little bit.
And like, what's the consistency of it? Is it liquid?
Yeah, it's liquid. Yeah, it's not really thin. It kind of varies. I mean, I use these all the way down to the bottom, and it does gel up a little bit if you don't put the cap on tight all the time. But yeah, you can kind of see.
Yeah. How are you applying it?
Just with a rag, and I do wear gloves because it's really hard to wash off your hands. And I'll just show you real fast. Let's see. I'll oil my hammer. So just a little bit of oil goes a long way. So I'll kind of just get the surface saturated. I don't need it to be super glossy or thick or anything. And then normally that will dry and not at all be sticky in a day. And if it's really sunny outside in Florida, I can get that to dry in a couple hours in the sun. So that works really well for interior. I would not use this for exterior. I have some pieces in my yard that I have just oil finished, but obviously I'm not worried if that rusts. I can take care of it, or I can paint it in the future. So for any exterior pieces in Florida, I would definitely go with paint. And what I have found is there's a couple Sherwin-Williams paints that were developed for the marine industry that are single stage. You don't need to mix it with anything. Really high performing paints that can be brushed on or sprayed on. And because it's single stage, it's easy to touch up down the road if you want. It's much more affordable than like an auto body grade paint. But the strongest I have found is an auto body grade paint. And so if I'm anything outside, kind of has to have one of two options. I really like clear coats, and I've been enjoying Sculpt Nouveau's Everclear clear coat. It's a 2-part clear, and you can get it in like matte, satin, and gloss, and it's really user friendly to put on. It lays down really smooth. It blends really well. Overspray hasn't really been an issue. But for Florida, even though it's UV stable, it's just not good enough. And I've heard of some folks in some other southern states who have had fails down the line where they start to see kind of rusting happening under the clear coat. So, I would still be careful with that if you're in a high humidity area. Moving into Core 10 is really fun for me because it doesn't involve any painting. So we'll see. And then certainly kind of moving in the direction of maybe a little more stainless, maybe some aluminum in the future.
Oh, well, I've heard about stainless. It's been said in one of these before that it's a godless, spiteful material. So
yeah. yeah, that tracks.
If you wanted to give us a couple of minutes and give a pan around to the shop and show us.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. So this is my little workstation. I've got a 50-pound little giant, and I've got a bit of a modified press there. I like my little fly press. I got this a few years ago at the Quad State conference. And this is a fun piece I was teaching at the local college. This is for total beginner students, the bird. We would do 3 hours of forging on day 1 and then 3 hours of welding on day 2. So that was a very ambitious project for a completely new student to take on. And then this actually, Kellen, you had pointed out the double helix in my portfolio. So that's one of the pieces left over from that project.
It's always cool when you end up with a great sample piece you can hang on the wall like that.
Yeah. 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 I like it. It makes me look fancy in here. And then, so this is the big sculpture taking up a little bit of space right now. This is the gantry I built by myself. Yeah, can you guys see the butterfly over there?
Oh, that's so cool.
I'll show you a couple more little sneaky. Got another butterfly right in this area. And let's see if I can get my groundhog in the picture. I really like my groundhog. Or actually, I think it's a prairie dog. I'm just giving you all the mammals I know. And I got one more for you. Sneaky little rabbit.
Oh, I love it.
So that's that. And then this corner has been devoted mostly to my teaching equipment. So I've got a few anvils. I've got the projects I teach most often up here. And I'm building out a couple belt sanders that are working really great, actually. So I think that's most of the tour, you guys.
Cool. Well, you've been getting lots of good accolades throughout this demo. I would just put down, great demo. What fun work.
Awesome.
So
I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you.
I sure do appreciate you doing this. And so anybody who hasn't, Leslie's got a great website, leslietharp.com. Check it out. If you're not following her on the social media, I highly recommend it. There's always cool pictures to look at.
Thanks. Try to keep it fresh. I don't know.
And Leslie, once again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your life to share your shop and your skill set with us.
Thank you guys so much. Have a good rest of your day.